Welcome to Beyond the Pulpit with Bishop Kevin, the show that is spiritual but not churchy. Each week, Bishop talks to different guests about real-life situations. If you want to support the Beyond the Pulpit podcast, head over to www.kevinwillisministries.org/podcast for more information. Now let's get into our episode.
Memphis, this is Bishop. I am back in studio. This is Beyond the Pulpit. You know I handle spiritual, not churchy. Today is an incredible day. I'll tell you why. We got someone great in the studio and excited about having her here. Really wanted to get her here a long time ago, but that's okay. She's here today. And we're going to talk, we're going to laugh, we're going to be serious, we're going to joke, because that's how crazy this is. Like, she's got the greatest personality. This is Lakisha Johnson. I will say officially Pastor Lakisha Johnson, Macedonia MB Church, where her uncle, Reverend Dr. Larry Rucker Sr., is the pastor. She really makes things go. She's a powerful person. She's a tremendous preacher. She's an incredible author. Like, she does it all. And so we got her in studio, and we're going to have a good time for a while here. So let me just say officially to her, thank you for coming in and sharing with us on Beyond the Pulpit. We are glad that you are here. You can say what you want to say, because you know we're going to laugh.
I know. And thank you, Bishop. Thank you for having me. I'm always overjoyed to be invited to someone else's platform. So I appreciate it.
That's so nice. That's so nice. See, she is family, so this is really easy, and I'm thankful that she's here. You know, I'm always intrigued. Sometimes on Facebook, and you got to tell me what it is. I've seen your messages. I guess my questions got two questions. Are they just messages to women, for women? Are they messages in general? So help me out with that real quick.
Generally, to women, for women.
Okay.
Is the basis of what I write. So anytime you see a status from me or post from me,
okay,
it's generally for women, about women, to women.
Okay.
Because sometimes I think we are so wound because
okay,
we have to be strong, we have to do all these type of things, and mentioning the books, and one book that I wrote, Surviving Me, came from that.
Wow.
So it was never something that I intended, but I ended up writing it in a scene in the book.
Wow.
It was a book called Broken.
Oh, wow.
And from that book, I got so many messages asking about that particular, because I had in that book, I just wrote a scene about a conference at a church that she needed, and I had so many messages about that. So Surviving Me came from that, as well as Dear Sis.
So you getting a whole lot of feedback there.
Yes, I get a lot of feedback.
Amazing.
A lot of feedback.
Amazing. Is that helping book sales?
Yes.
Oh, wow.
Yes. So, I get so many messages on social media or emails, because I have my email in the back, and I get so many messages, especially for books, because I write books for things that I haven't gone through, but it's what God gives me.
Amazing.
So I
stuff.
get messages from people that saying that's me,
So you're writing past your own experiences.
Right.
That is amazing stuff. So you're writing in a sense, and people are writing you back, responding, saying, "This is helping me."
Mm-hmm.
How did you get this information? Can I get more? Can you say more? So you're building a greater audience in so many different veins here. How are you responding to all these different people?
I respond because I don't ever want to get to a place where there's a disconnect with that.
Certainly.
So I respond to, and people are surprised because most emails I get is, if you see this, or if this reaches you, or I'm surprised that you responded back, and I said it's just me, so that's who I am. And I don't pretend to be anything else. So when people write me, I write back. I get a lot of requests for prayer.
Amazing.
Or just for advice, or things like that. So, and I respond to everyone.
When I found out that you had written over 30 books, first of all, let me just back the train up and say, I have not written a book. Now, I'm featured in some books, but I've not written a book. I can't even imagine. And somebody's always saying to me, you need to do this, you need to write a book. It's like, not doing that. I think the patience and the diligence you have to write a book is incredible. With Wednesday in the Word, Freddie has raised up making Wednesday in the Word a devotional. So I think that's a good idea. But for me, primarily, the work has already been done. So it ain't like I got to reinvent the wheel. But Freddie's talking about taking the devotionals from almost, I guess, 3 years back and developing that into a devotional. I'm good with that. I'm writing my dissertation now, and it's like pulling teeth because I'm having to sit still and write something that's not a sermon, and it's killing me. So I don't know how in the world, I mean, to horn in on just the theme of what you're trying to convey, and to develop a process for writing. I got a lot of respect for you because I see people all the time, and pastors and preachers are releasing books, and I think that's wonderful. Not doing that. I have no desire. I'm so serious to write a book. People are asking me, "Are you ever going to write a book about New Life and its birth and movement?" Don't plan on it. Now I could get 5 years up the road and feel differently, but I have the utmost respect for you because I don't see past writing a sermon. I don't see writing a book, and you've written 30 or more. So how do you challenge your thoughts to write? I mean,
it's a challenge, but it's also something that I love. It's not something that I set out to do.
Really?
No, I never.
So you had no plan?
No.
How did you start doing this?
I never intended to be a writer or author. I used to write, growing up and stuff like that, and being in church, people would ask me to do like occasions and stuff. So I mean, I knew I could write, but I never intended to be an author or a writer. That was never in my plans. Never to say. I've never wanted to do it. But in 2012, I released a book. And it wasn't churchy. It wasn't nowhere near Christian fiction.
Well, what was it if it wasn't? Wait, hold up, slow down.
We had a girls' weekend. Me and my sisters and my aunt and some friends. So we had a girls' weekend in Nashville. And when we came back, it wasn't. I mean, we didn't. It wasn't a wild weekend. It was just a girls' weekend where we hung out.
It was an enjoyable weekend.
Yes. And so when I came back, I was sitting down at home, and I just ended up taking their personalities and creating characters.
Interesting stuff.
So I ended up writing a book, and the book was called A Secret Worth Keeping, and it was just something that I wrote. I ended up writing that book, and
that's a serious title.
So it was about these 6 friends, but. And that book, it wasn't Christian, and it didn't mention God nowhere. And but it was about these 6 friends.
You do know Freddie is really smiling in the studio. You do know Freddie is smiling in the studio.
And that book, and I never intended. So when I wrote this book,
so we ain't gonna teach this in Sunday school.
No. So when I end up writing this book, I end up publishing it with an author. I self-published it first. Didn't know anything what I was doing, but I ended up publishing with the author, with a publishing company.
Certainly.
And that book ended up going from 1 book to like 5, a series. So it was A Secret Worth Keeping, and then and so when I wrote those books, I mean, it was just like wildfire. I mean, but that was in during that time, because it was like it was full of anything that you can imagine. It was in that book.
Okay.
With these 6 friends who were going through infidelity and all that kind of stuff in their marriages.
Oh my.
And so when I released those books with that publisher, and that was it. But then in 2016, I ended up writing a book called The Family That Lies with my sister, my twin sister.
Oh, wow.
And it was about 2 sisters, Grace and Mercy. And their father was a pastor. And
so you do see Quincy looking at you over there. You didn't pique his curiosity.
In 2016, I released The Family That Lies. And so
LIES.
LIES.
Look at here.
And so
look at here.
it was, so even though it wasn't fully Christian, it was on the basis of it. But then in 2017, I couldn't write nothing. I couldn't release a book.
Well, you got to be good, because Freddie got all 4.
So, in 2017, God shut me down. I didn't understand what he was doing, but I couldn't write a book to save my life. It was like, I mean, no matter what I tried, whatever, I couldn't write a book. But
did you ever come to determine what the problem was?
He was shifting me to Christian fiction.
Oh.
And I didn't realize that until that point.
So he wasn't gonna let you be Toni Morrison.
No. So
Freddie, why are you looking at me like that? Oh my. Oh my. She's got some Toni Morrison stuff. Okay, I'm sorry.
But he shifted me. He shifted me to Christian fiction. And in the beginning, January 2018, I released a book called Dear God, Hear My Prayer.
Oh wow.
And it was the first book that was Christian. And so here I am saying, okay, God, what are you doing? A. And B, how is folks receive this, knowing that I'm going from a secret worth keeping that's talking about them doing stuff and all. And I mean, secret worth keeping they were doing all kind of stuff. I mean, anything you could think of, they were probably doing.
Oh,
and I'm saying, okay, God, how are you going to take me from this to Dear God, Hear My Prayer?
Oh, wow.
And how people going to receive me. But didn't have any problem. I mean, in 2018, I was releasing a book every 45 days. I released a book every 45 days.
How in the world?
From January to I think maybe June, I released a book. And no, it was every 30 days. Every month on the 20th, I was releasing a book. So I released Dear God, Hear My Prayer, 2:32 a.m., The Marriage Bed, Chaste, all those books that was Christian fiction.
Now, say the names of these books one more time.
Dear God, Hear My Prayer.
We got that one. That's a good one.
2:32 a.m. is dealing with a woman who lost her baby to SIDS, and she lost her faith.
All right.
I have Chaste, who is about Magnolia, who is asked to be a senior pastor of a church.
Okay.
But she had some demons in her past that was chasing her.
So this is a woman who's supposed to take over. Gotcha,
right.
Gotcha.
So, her senior pastor asked her to take over as senior pastor of the church.
Oh wow.
And even though she was already in ministry, working under him, she had this past that she was afraid of that had been chasing her.
Okay, so did she ever take the church?
She did.
My God.
She did.
Okay.
But she had to get to that point.
You got some stuff now.
And so I have The Marriage Bed. I released The Pastor's Admin. Now, that's Freddie type of book.
Okay.
That's Freddie's type of book, because The Pastor's Admin is dealing with Daphne, who is the admin to a pastor. And she says it's going to either be his secrets or her sanity. Because he was a type that, once he got this,
you need your own show.
And,
you need your own show.
It went to his head, literally, both heads, literally. And
you need your own show.
And she had to decide whether it was going to be his secrets or her sanity.
Woo. My God.
Yes.
So how have you balanced all of this with being a full-blown preacher? In other words, is there any point, because there may not be a point, is there any point where ministry runs into anything you're writing? Or could it possibly be that writing is ministry?
It is.
Okay.
It is. And I tell people writing is ministry. It's not, so that's my tagline. It's not just writing is ministry.
Okay.
Because it is. Because I tell people all the time, these topics I have no idea about. I mean, I wrote about Wanda, who was 50 years old going through a divorce. I don't know about that. I haven't gone through a divorce. I wrote about, in Dear God, Jamie being molested. I don't know anything about that. So those type of things that I write about, I don't have a clue about. So it is ministry. God wakes me up and gives me titles. He gives me the character names. He gives me and people ask, do you write with an outline? No, I just write. I start with a blank Word document and I write. You
are literally sitting. Oh wow.
Mm-hmm, and I write.
Wow.
I don't know how the story will end. And that's why I tell people all the time, I don't get book covers done until the end, because
Certainly.
I don't know, the name will change, all of that. So I don't know what the book cover will even look like until the end, because I don't know how the story will end.
Oh, amazing.
I write about different things like that, So just like SIDS, even though I was familiar with SIDS because my sister had a baby who died with SIDS, it wasn't me who was going through it.
Certainly.
So I had to, I pray and I ask God, give me the character's heart in order for me to reach the person who's reading it.
Oh wow!
Because obviously it's a purpose for it, because He's giving it to me.
Certainly.
And so I have to be able to feel what they're feeling in order for it to relate.
Mm-hmm.
And so and that's what I pray about. So.
Amazing stuff. It's so different writing a book versus writing a sermon.
It is.
Because even though a sermon is alive and you're taking a person from one place to another, certainly, and there's a path that you have to take them on to get them to that desired place. You're writing a book, and it's in those people's hands. It's in that person's hands, and there's a point where they're reading and reading again, and you are taking a character and making that character somebody that they can directly understand because he or she is in their culture zone,
Right.
so they can identify with.
Right.
That's difficult sometimes to write a sermon that, unfortunately, Keisha, we're writing to people who may or may not read the Bible like that.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'm talking about an Ezekiel, and I'm talking to people, first of all, who don't know who this cat is,
Right.
What his ministry was, and more importantly, how in the world does this relate to 2023
Right.
and my present life experiences? Well, when you snatch somebody who's in their culture, then there's a point of identification that becomes far more easier, because even though this character is in a book, culture-wise, I can identify with them.
Mm-hmm.
And people don't look at biblical characters that way. There's almost, and I hate to say that, in this time, there's almost not a point of identification.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, Keisha, I'll be honest enough to say that I approach every sermon from the standpoint of they literally don't know who this cat is.
Right.
They don't understand how the dots come together, how these things connect. And so when I think about writing, I can see your books flying because culturally they tap on something, as you said, people are going through.
Mm-hmm.
That's always the power of those kinds of books, because they have a point of identification. And I think the key is to get people reading so that people can be healed, and so that people can come to a point of wholeness and
Mm-hmm.
healthiness.
Mm-hmm. And that's why I write from, and I tell people I write for imperfect people, because in my books, you may have cursing, you may have sex, sin and all that type of things. So, and I had to start putting a disclaimer in the book, which I hated to do, but I got to the point, because you have some people who, when they hear Christian fiction, they want it to be clean Christian fiction with no cursing, no sex. And so I have to ask them the question, is that how you live?
Ooh.
Because if
That was
you don't
deep right
want,
there.
you don't want any, I even had somebody there's a book conference for Christian writers or readers and all that, who, and every year they reach out to me and wanting me to come.
But they got to ask you some questions.
But they only want me to feature clean Christian fiction. That's not how I write.
Oh, wow.
Because I'm trying to reach the person who is imperfect, the one who's struggling with their faith, the one who's mad at God, the one who's been through the situations that they've been through. And sometimes they're gonna be angry and they're gonna curse, or sometimes they're gonna make a mistake. And so, not everybody's life has a happily ever after. So I don't write that, because most of my books don't end that way.
I've just been watching a couple of commercials, and I think they've been on probably about 6 months. And when you first see the commercial, it's the drugs, it's the gangs, it's the killing, it's a variety of stuff, and you're appalled at what you see initially, and then the tagline going off, commercials leaving, is saying, "This is what Jesus identifies with," and you think, "Oh wow, yeah, he did," because first century Christianity is so far removed from what we experience now. Like, Christianity has been whitewashed, and I'm not talking about white people washed.
Right.
I could talk about that, but I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about whitewashed in the sense of, I think if we ever saw what first century Christians look like over against what we look like now, we would probably be very amazed at what they dealt with. So I think it's a cool thing that you got a book that is relatable. Because I think that's the only way you lead people to Christ, whether we're talking your books,
right,
whether we're talking church, or any entity where salvation is an issue. You know what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. How do you connect to a Christ that you don't relate to?
Right. And that's the thing. And so when I write, I pray and say, God, if I can lead somebody to you, even on the pages of this fiction book, then let it be. Because you have people who struggling with everything, and sometimes they get to a place where the enemy is making them believe that you've messed up so bad that God don't want you no more, or that he won't use you, or that you can't be used. So I write those in. So I write sermons in, I write Bible studies, I write scriptures, and I break it down to a point where they can understand it. Because most times you don't have somebody who's in church, but they may read this fiction book.
So how have you made the leap then, Keisha, in terms of church where you're serving and material? Have you had an opportunity, not necessarily in just Macedonia, in any church, to not just bring books for the purpose of selling? Have you had an opportunity to talk about characterizations and all of these things, not necessarily for a Bible study, but for a presentation, so that people have an opportunity to get a full understanding of not only what you write, but why you write it?
I do sometimes. Those type of things comes out like when I meet with book groups and book clubs and things like that. But I make it a point, even on my social media, if you're looking to get to know me, if you go through my social media, then
Mm-hmm.
because I even preach that way, because I'm not gonna go to a Women's Day and preach a Proverbs 31 when most of the time some people haven't even got to that far in the Bible. So I don't preach a Proverbs 31 verse when I go to a Women's Day. I might, and I tell people, I'm not your typical, so you may, because I don't want us to be caught up in that when most of us haven't even got to that point yet. So, and that's the same way I write, because I want people to understand and relate.
Mm-hmm.
So I break all those type of things down, and so even with ministry, because even if you're broken, you have to get to a place of you want to get to a place of restoration.
Mm-hmm.
How does that look? What does that look like? And so my latest book, Almost Destroyed, is dealing with Ava, who was in a 13-year relationship with a narcissist. And the first time she told him no, that, he wanted to destroy her life.
Wow.
And, and so she was at a place where she wasn't in church. She knew God, but she wasn't in church because she never had anybody who led her that way. All she's ever known is hurt. So all she's ever known from relationships is hurt. And so when she started encountering these people on her journey who's leading her to God, and her first thing is, this is too good to be true. And I had somebody reach out to me in a review to say, is this realistic? Will you have all these people around you who are leading you to God? Absolutely.
Why would that be unrealistic?
Right. So because she's meeting these people on her journey. So my thing is, God knows where you are. He knows what you need.
Oh, yeah, that's
and
the
he'll
providence of God.
he'll put people in your path to
Yeah.
lead you that way.
That's the providence of God.
So those are the type of questions that I get. Is this realistic? Will she meet this many people? Will you in real life, will you meet this many people? Yes, because sometimes you have to meet 10 people before you recognize that God is truly real.
Yeah, that's the providence of God. That's not far-fetched.
Mm-hmm.
I think we would be surprised if we ever interviewed people who come to church regularly, or let me better say, people who are at a higher level of commitment. If we interview them to understand that their commitment wasn't immediate.
Mm-hmm.
I preached about that the other Sunday when I preached about the wise man and the foolish man, and the wise man built his house on the rock. And I said in the message that the assumption is that when he built his house on the rock, he instantly made a change, and he did not.
Right.
Because that word built suggested it's a process.
Right.
So every time he heard truth, he put truth underneath him. And I think that's the process that's cool for me anyway, with God, that there are times when you're trying to get to a place of commitment in God, and God is patient enough to providentially keep placing people in your path and word in your path so that you can get to a place of strength. Because my thing is, I know that sometimes in all of our preaching, we're preaching to people who are convicted by what we're preaching and can't change it that same day.
Right.
And sometimes you'll tell people, you need to go do this, and this, and they believe it, they know it to be true, and are convicted enough to go make the change. But what they got to change can't be changed in a day.
Right.
It's a process. It's
a mindset.
Yeah.
It's a mindset change. And
it's going to take some time.
And time, and because I've been there, before I accepted my call to ministry, I was not necessarily in the world, but I knew God, been raised in church all my life, but I didn't have a relationship with God. I had religion.
And those two totally different things.
Two totally different things.
Yeah.
I mean, I was dressed up like church folks. I looked like church folk. I talked like them, but I didn't have a relationship with him. And so, and it's the same thing, because, we go through this thing called life, and we have all these struggles and strains and all that. And like I said, grandma raised us in church. From the time we were able to walk, we were in church, Vacation Bible School and NBC and all those type of things, but still not fully having a relationship with God. And so when I heard him calling me, it was a struggle, because I'm saying, how can you be calling somebody like me? You know the stuff that I've doing, the stuff that I'm in,
but that's
been
Bible.
in.
That's Bible. That's Bible from many of the male prophets that God chose in Old Testament to be representatives of his.
Mm-hmm.
And gosh, we don't even talk about New Testament and those 12. And when you run the full gambit of personality and character and sinfulness, I mean, you could just spend all day talking about why me? Why would you want me?
Right.
And I think that what God realizes is that the way to save people, convince people, is to call somebody that's relatable.
Right.
Like, I relate to you because.
Mm-hmm.
Because sometimes you start looking at people and in the appearance of having it all, you see nothing that you can adapt to. So
right.
you don't even aspire. That's like, oh, well, they've been doing that all their life. So
right.
But I think God chooses people, Keisha, that I really believe that another person can look at and say, you know what? I know. Yeah. So if he did that for
mm-hmm.
he ought to be able to do something for
mm-hmm.
me. And that's a cool thing.
Mm-hmm.
Well, tell me this. How did you then, how do you do the assistant pastor thing? What does that mean to you? The preaching piece, the leadership piece, because you're in a leadership role. You're not just preaching, you're leading preaching, which means your leadership has as much voice as your preaching. Tell me about that. How did you get to that place? What are you doing in there?
So I'm a member of Macedonia MB Church in Hollywood, Mississippi. It's a little small town in between Robertsonville and Tunica. If you drive too fast, you're gonna miss it. And I
have no idea what that is.
Right.
And I've been to Tunica many times.
And most people don't. And Hollywood is a small little section right there off of Highway 61.
Really?
So, mm-hmm. So if you're going too fast, you're gonna miss the sign. And my uncle has been a pastor of that church for over 30, I want to say probably 33 years this year.
Wow.
And so he's been preaching since he was 19. So all of my life he's been, he's been in ministry.
Mm-hmm.
So we've always known that. Never had any intentions of joining this church. I was a member of Magnolia First Baptist in Castalia. That's where I had been a member of my entire life. So one Sunday we went to his church, and I had been praying. I had been feeling this urge to move. To leave my home church, but I'm saying this is where I'm comfortable at, this is where I've been, but I recognized that there was something else going on. But again, during that time in my life, I was fearful of whatever God was calling me to do.
Mm-hmm.
But one Sunday, went down and I had been praying for God to lead me. When he opened the doors of the church, I saw myself walking down the aisle to join a church with a drive over an hour and 15 minutes to get to every Sunday.
Yeah, I was going to say.
And then I didn't realize what God was doing then. But I knew that it was because he was cultivating the seed of him calling me. And
so
that's
you did this before you got into ministry?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so I joined down there before I even got into ministry. Had no idea. And when I finally accepted my call to ministry, I told him, he was like, I knew it. I was just waiting on you to tell me.
Which is interesting.
And got up in front of the church and announced that God had called me to ministry, and went back to my seat in the back, in the back of the church. Went back and sat down. And the next Sunday, one of the older members came to me, and she was like, "No, ma'am, you need to be in that pulpit. You need to be sitting in that pulpit next Sunday. I won't catch you back here on this back row no more."
So what did he do in terms of a process for getting you ready?
It was for me, it was this feeling of knowing that he was pulling me away from the things that I had been accustomed to. One was leaving my home church because I was comfortable there, doing the work, and I'm saying, okay, God, you sending me down to this church, even though I had visited there a number of times,
because it's family.
it's family, and so I'm visiting there, but it's not where I know. So you're sending me down here. There has to be a reason. But of course, it would take years before I got to that place because I was broken, struggling, dealing with, daddy issues of, stuff like that. And so me still not knowing, so I'm going there doing the same thing I've been doing in my home church, wherever I'm needed.
Amazing.
So
Amazing.
and when he called me to preach, and with my uncle, he was like, okay, God, now it's time for you to get the running.
So how did you develop into the preacher that you are? What have you done? What has your uncle done to help you? Because how long you been in preaching ministry now?
Since 2014,
All right.
almost 10 years.
Yeah. So there's obviously been some development. I've heard it in you. And there's nothing about that that's suggestive of, you just started. Like there's incredible movement in your preaching. I think the only thing I would say to you is probably what I've said, and I'll even get back to that, to other women. Don't be pigeonholed into just preaching to women. I think if a woman is called to preach, she's called to preach to everybody.
Right.
And the unfortunate thing sometimes about the Baptist church, good old Baptist church, is you'll do the women's days and the teas, and that's all cute and stuff. But at the end of the day, if I'm not called to preach to men, I'm not called to preach.
Right.
And that's not a God issue. That's a denominational issue. And, I felt that way, Keisha. It's so funny. I was pastoring Riverside at that time, and I want to say I turned 40, and they were calling me to preach. Some church was calling me to preach Youth Day. And I was getting ready to do it, and it dawned on me, you are 40 years old. I'm not a youth. I don't even want to try to do this.
Right.
Like, what am I don't know. And so I called the guy back and said, can't do it. Well, why not? I'm 40 years old. You calling me to preach Youth Day. Now, you got to understand, Youth Day for them was children. And I'm like, I'm not doing that. I don't even relate. I don't even want to work that hard. So I'm doing it. And I came to the conclusion after that phone call, which he was very mad about it, by the way. It didn't make any difference. I wasn't coming. That you need to do those things. You need to stay in that arena where you fit.
Right.
And so for me to be preaching Youth Day at 40 made no sense. And busting my brain trying to think, okay, now what am I going to say that relate? Nothing. And so I think it's wrong of the church or pastors to pigeonhole women who are in ministry to suggest that you're at your best when you're preaching Women's Day. Because see, my idea of Women's Day was in my dad's church, where all the women were sitting in the pulpit with those big hats on. And, the sister who spoke wasn't the preacher, because my dad did not accept women in ministry at all, none. My stepfather nor my biological father. Wasn't having it. I do think if my dad had lived to see Linda preach, he would have been fine, because he loved Linda. But my stepfather, oh no, you couldn't even bring up the issue. My dad was soft-hearted, and he would say stuff like, within God's time. Well, no, it was within his time.
Right.
Yeah. So when I think about you preaching, and I've seen you several times, and there's nothing about your preaching that suggests that you are a novice at it. Your communication is almost syncopated, and it reminds me of a Freddie Haynes, a friend of ours in Los Angeles, in Dallas, Texas, who preaches in a very syncopated way, and he's brilliant at getting word across. So, what was your form of development in that?
Studying. And not only just
because you're not like you're your own person.
So I studied church, not necessarily in books, but being in church.
Okay.
And I knew and I recognized what I didn't want.
What is it that you didn't want?
Well, the same tired preaching, where you know, that sign, because I recognize, and even before I accepted my call to ministry, being in church, I would look around and you will see, especially the kids with their head in their phones, or some of the adults sleep, and all that kind of thing. So I'm listening, but while I'm listening, I'm also taking it in to say, okay, this is going over these children's head. And I realized that too, because when I had my kids, and I realized sitting them in church, it was going over their heads too. And so I'm sitting and I'm looking and I'm studying and I'm listening and all those type of things, and I'm saying, okay, this don't make sense, and and I started having Bible study with the youth, and you asking them questions that they can't answer, but they've been in church all this time.
Yeah, it didn't make
so it doesn't make sense, and then it's disconnection from them, because we're sitting them in church, or we're sitting them to a children's church where they're just having juice, cookies, and sandwiches, but we're not teaching them anything.
But I like the sandwiches.
Me too.
Let me go tell you, I like the sandwiches. But I think it's powerful in the sense of, as I said, I've listened to you preach, and it's real directional.
Because I preach in a way that I would want to be preached to.
But it's conversational too,
right? In order for me, because I want to be able to understand. If I'm listening to you, if I'm listening to you preach for 30 minutes or God knows, not longer than that. But if I'm listening to you preach, I want to be able to pull something from that.
Certainly.
Because if not, then I'm just, what am I doing, or what are we doing if we're just sitting there? So I preach in a way that I want people to understand, and to make them think, to make them ask questions, those type of things. So and that's just the way I preach, So I preach in a way that I want to hear.
But preaching for me is, after 43 years of doing it, it is harder now than when I started.
Mm-hmm. It to me, it seems like it gets harder.
It is harder now, and it's harder because of audience.
Mm-hmm.
It's not harder in terms of study, because after 43 years, there's so much embedded in my brain about Scripture, and then when I go back and look again, I'm thankful for the revelation.
Mm-hmm.
I think the difficulty for me is, I think I'm challenged by the different audience, because you and I both know there was an era in the life of the church where it appeared that people were naturally accepting of the word.
Mm-hmm.
Now I think we're competing with so many different things,
right, that
I want to call distractions,
mm-hmm.
That you have to work harder to even make a point.
Mm-hmm.
If that's true.
And you do. And I mean, and that's just the way it is, especially when you're in a place where people who are comfortable with where they are, or receiving what they receive, and and you come, so it is a struggle.
It's a major struggle. So, there are points at which, and it's comical when I talk to our preachers about my editing process, because I write sermon in full verbatim. So a written sermon for me could be 30 pages, completion. But that's the theological everything. But that's not the editing process.
Right.
And when I finish editing that 30-page work, usually 8 pages come out of it.
Mm-hmm.
And so somebody asked me, well, what do you do with the other somebody? I file them away.
Mm-hmm.
The other 22 get filed somewhere, and it's a matter of research and reading that comes up later to reconnect my mind with that text.
Right.
But the audience is of such that I work through a text thinking, am I going to be able in 30 minutes to explain to them the message that I said God gave to me?
Mm-hmm.
And I got to be honest with you, after 43 years of doing this, there's still points at which I don't know if it was successful that Sunday. And that's difficult, because I'm thinking my whole job is to explain something.
Right.
And to get to the end of that process and not be sure if you've explained it completely to the extent that a person understands you. Because see, the point of preaching is for some action to take place.
Mm-hmm.
But if you don't understand it, no action comes
right.
out of it.
Right.
So that's the difficulty. And so when I think of even your writing skills and your books, I guess I'm thinking of, along with your preaching style, so many different ways God has blessed you to communicate in a very natural way so that people get it.
Right.
You know what I'm saying? Because the thing I said I would never do as a young preacher, and it's the thing I've never done, is I've never worked to sound like a preacher. And you know how the old preachers used to get up and elongate words, you know, and long pauses and stuff. I loved it. Now, it was classic for me because it was comical. But first of all, I told God no, because I was like, ain't no preacher's named Kevin. You ain't got nan preacher named Kevin. Ain't nobody gonna ask me to preach. You know what I'm saying? I was like, God, don't nobody's named Kevin is preaching. You got to give me another name. So I would not say Kevin. I'd be like KB, K Brian. You know, I'd come up with all these names, and I told my mom I'm gonna change my name. She said, "Are you gonna do what?" I said, "I can't preach with that name. Don't know about it." And then, you know, after those first couple of sermons of elongations and hysterics and all them long words, like, Negro, are you serious? And my dad said, you know, he pinned me down one day. He said, "Son, you sound like an idiot." I was like, "Could you not say that in a nicer way?"
No.
He said, "Well, you stood up there and said it." And so I applaud you for being very real, because I think the church needs real ministry.
And that's been my biggest prayer. I don't want to be anything other than what you've called me to be. You know, if I ever get to a place where, you know, it's more about me than you, then shut my mouth. You know, because I don't want that. And I tell people all ask all the time. I tell them, what you see is what you get from me. You know, so I'm not gonna pretend to be anything other than, because I've been through the struggle long enough. And and me and my husband had a conversation about this where I told him the way we were struggling before. You know, I don't want to go back to that. You know, because I know what the struggle looks like when we were when I was playing with God, or when I wasn't doing the right thing I know to do. So, you know, and even when God called me to preach, and I have this tattoo on my arm, and it's the day after I accepted my calling, because that's when life changed for me.
Oh wow!
And I've shared the story on social media before, but it was Labor Day weekend, 2014. We were staying in some apartments in Collierville, apartments that, you know, we were paying way more for. We were struggling, you know, having problems in our marriage and all that type of thing, and we were getting ready to resign. I told God I didn't want to be in that apartment anymore, but we couldn't find anywhere to move before our lease was up. So I told him, so let's sign a 6-month lease. And by this time, it'll be February. We can, you know, move and decide and all of that. So we did. Went and signed a 6-month lease. The young lady in the leasing office, their printer or something was down, couldn't print us a copy of it. Fine, we'll come back and get it. That weekend, that Friday, my husband dropped me off at the nail shop. He was going home because I had a dream the night before. I had a dream that Thursday night that there was a snake in the house. And it was in our master bathroom was where I dreamed it, that it was a snake in the house. And that morning we got up, getting ready to go to work. It was me, my husband, and my son. And the apartment we stayed in had a door that leads out to a garage. And I'm waiting. I done got dressed, getting ready, and waiting on him. And he comes in and says, "Don't go out the garage door. There's a snake in the garage."
So this actually happened?
Yeah. That was this next morning. We get up, getting ready to leave. He comes in and said, "Don't go out the garage door. There's a snake in the garage." We had a deep freezer in the garage. It was behind this deep freezer. And I was like, what? Because I know I just had this dream. And he says, "There's a snake in the garage. Huge snake." They called the maintenance people. They couldn't catch it. It ended up going through a hole in the wall.
The snake did? The
snake to the neighbor's garage. And so my husband came in, I told him, they're not going to find that snake. And so they end up covering the hole to go next door to go in the garage to find this snake. And so we end up leaving. That Friday afternoon, he dropped me off at the nail shop. He said, "I'm going to go to the house to see if they found the snake, patch the hole, blah, blah, blah." And he goes down to the leasing office. They was like, no, we couldn't find the snake, but we didn't patch the hole. We're going to wait because we show y'all are moving. And he was like, no, we just signed a 6-month lease. And he was like, well, we can't find anything about a lease. And so I'm hearing God say, move.
Oh, wow.
And I'm saying, what we moving to? We ain't got nowhere to go. We ain't got this. And he said, move. And that weekend, when he called and told me, I said, okay, you're going to have to trust me. This is going to sound crazy, but I just need you to trust me. God said, move. We packed up our entire apartment. Packed up, ended up going to an extended stay. Had no idea what God was doing, but he was shifting our life.
Oh, wow.
And we ended up moving from that apartment and moving to a house in South Haven where we never struggled. I mean, everything changed.
Wow.
And so that's why I have this date on my arm, the date after, because I said that's what changed for me, because we went from keep making the same amount of money, being in the same position, but everything changed within that. And so just by trusting that God said move, and we didn't have a destination in mind, no address, but we packed up, moved, put everything in storage, moved to an extended stay, for 30 days, and everything shifted.
That's the heart of God.
Mm-hmm.
That is the heart of God.
So that's why I'm like I am, because I know what God can do, and so I can't change, because to fit into somebody else's box, I can't do that. So either you're gonna accept me for who I am or not, and I'm good with that. And it's the same way when it comes to writing. I tell people it may not be for you, and I'm okay with that. So that's why I had to start putting a disclaimer in the book to say this is Christian fiction, but may not be what you're used to, and that's fine with me. I would rather you not read it than to leave a bad review, because it may include something that you don't want to see.
Oh, wow.
But that's who I am.
Oh, wow. Oh, wow. This has been phenomenal. Again, I said, Freddie's one of, I ain't gonna even, she's got all your stuff. I think it's been cool to hear ministry, to hear what God is doing through you as an author, to understand the responsibility that you've taken in your church, to align yourself. Have you run into any difficulty in ministry as a woman? And if not, that's cool.
Not necessarily. My old home church that I came from didn't believe in women preachers either.
I knew Pastor Bass. Mm-hmm. Well, no, you weren't going there and preach. No.
And they didn't believe in women preachers either.
But they're doing it now, though, right?
They are now.
Okay.
They are now. I even had them to call and invite me over. And really? I had one of the social ministers right before I got ready to preach. They had the
So
mic.
You've already done the service? Mm-hmm. Oh, mm-hmm. Wow.
So I preached. They ended up calling me to preach one Sunday. And one of the social ministers, they had the mic that was up, but then they had a wireless mic. Amazing. So he laid the wireless mic down and said, this is for the big boys, or something he said, made in reference to the wireless mic. Until after I finished preaching. And he ended up bringing me brought me the wireless mic, but just make those type of things. So those type of things that I've run into, or but I don't let that bother me, because I tell them, y'all don't believe in women preachers. I don't believe in half you Negroes either. Yeah. Because most of y'all ain't even right. So if you think you're gonna bother me by saying you don't believe in a women preacher, listen.
You can't be disturbed. You cannot be disturbed because you don't understand God fully if you can't embrace God using a woman.
Right.
Especially since there's so many places in Scripture where he has powerfully used women. So now you're denouncing everything God has ever done through a woman, and you've made this a denominational plank versus the sovereignty of God. So that means what we do as Baptists is more important than what God does as creator and sovereign. Yeah, that don't make sense.
Yeah.
I think you got to be you. I think you got to do your own thing. I think there is an audience that is receptive to you. I think you preach the whole counsel of God. I think you, like a T.D. Jakes said the other day in Marketplace, this great interview. Everything that's inside of you, let God use it. everything inside of you is not for pulpit.
Right.
I mean, he said some incredible things, man. Why not be an entrepreneur? Why not be the person that God can take into every arena and do something phenomenal with?
Right.
Why just be in a church on Sunday?
Mm-hmm.
Why just be behind that desk when the whole fulfillment of your life can be about experiencing everything that God wants to do with you?
Right.
So that you don't get to the end of your life. Because I really think a lot of people do this, man. In ministry, they get to the end of their ministry and the end of their lives and have so many regrets about what they couldn't do, and really, to be honest with you, about what they didn't have the courage to do.
Right.
Like if I get to the end of my life, and I was having this thought the other day, it's so funny, Keisha. I was thinking, my birthday is now this month, and I turn 61, and I was thinking, okay, I graduate next year, and then I'll turn 62, and it dawned on me, I'm closer to 70 than I really thought I would be. Yeah, we're gonna leave that alone. But anyway, years are coming faster.
Mm-hmm.
And so I don't want to get to the end of my life and look back and say, you know what, I should have. I want to get to the end of my life and look back and say, everything I wanted to do, I did it.
Right.
Nah, not everything was successful.
Mm-hmm.
There's some things I could have done differently, but I tried to do everything I wanted to do. And I think right now, that's why I live life without regret.
Mm-hmm.
Because for me, Keisha, starting this church was the greatest challenge of my life versus going to another church, an established church.
Right.
But having the courage to tell God, yes, we'll do this. Because it was a decision. It was you can go to this established church, you can resume and get in as pastor, or you can do what I want you to do. If you go here, very limited, if you let me say success, very limited success, because you're not really where you want to be. Mm-hmm. If you go here and start, you're going to be exactly where you want to be. And I heard a guy, he's long gone, sweet man, pastor of church in this city. When I first got to Riverside, and when he said it, it brought me to tears. He was retiring from his church. He had been there 45 years. And he stood on his last Sunday and said, just blew me away. He said, I'm thankful for these years, but I never should have been here. So I'm like, okay. He said, I'm not the guy who should have pastored this church.
Wow.
He said, I did it because I thought the Lord wanted me to do it. He said, but I pastored every year knowing that I'm in another person's place. I feel like I've wasted 40 some odd years of my life.
Wow.
What could I have done? Now, I love you all and I appreciate the kindness that you've given to me. And he said, I think we've done great things for the kingdom, but I've been out of place for over 40 years. Oh my God. First of all, the courage to say that.
Mm-hmm.
But then the fact that you spent 40 some odd years of your life.
Well, I think, and I'm dealing with that now. Well, similar.
Okay.
Because I realized that Macedonia is not my final place.
Certainly.
And even though, I love the people, they love me. I've been able to serve some good people. There's some good, faithful people there. But I realized that that's not where God is keeping me.
No.
And so I had to get to that point because even though God had given me this assignment years ago, I still felt guilty saying, me leaving them, saying, or even leaving my uncle, helping him, being the assistant pastor and all those type of things. But I had to get to a point. And I think you told me one day that wasn't my problem as far as, so I had to get to that place where I was comfortable enough to say, it's time for me to say, to move, because I realized that as long as I stay, I'm not getting the full of what God has for me.
There's a point where you got to be courageous.
Mm-hmm.
If you were courageous enough to move out of that apartment without a path or plan, and God unfolded something that was totally providential, and you could trust him to do that. That's the thing about God most people don't catch, Keisha, that one demonstration of faith leads to another demonstration of faith, leads to another demonstration of faith. And you live that way the rest of your life until it becomes not something that you're daring to do now because you're going to see what God is going to do next. It's where you live that way because you understand that the just live by faith, literally. So I think that the sky is the limit for you. And I think you will do what you're saying, that you'll trust God for the next level. And again, in trusting God for the next level, everybody may or may not be accepting of what that is, but this ain't about other people. It's about you. And so that's what you embrace. Because if you had stayed at Magnolia, if you had stayed at Magnolia, that would have been a challenge. That would have been a major challenge. And I know women who have sat in churches for years under pastors who said, you can't preach here. And so you sit under that leadership and never fully embrace who you're called to be. That's got to be depressing.
It is. I mean, it's depressing and it keeps you stagnant. It keeps you stagnant and suffering. And you're not supposed to live like for a lot longer than what you were supposed to.
Yeah, you don't live life like that. You cannot live life like that. And you're waiting on God to kill him or you just put him out something. It ain't supposed to work like that. So I fully embrace the fact, and I mean it sincerely, that God is going to do even greater with you. Write everything you want to write. Just give Freddie a copy so she'll be okay.
I'm actually working. Well, me and God is working on this thing, this new series He's given me, breaking down the wedding vows. So I'm doing a mini series on the wedding vows.
Interesting stuff.
So that's what I'm working on now. And I told
you need to make a movie. That's what you need. I was
like, you giving me this, so that's what I'm working on.
One of these books needs to be a movie. Quincy, don't you think so? Oh yeah. Look, what's this thing? Bridgerton. What's the other one? Queen Charlotte. Look, she need to be right beside him. I mean, just all kind of stuff. I've seen Bridgerton one episode, and I was like, yeah, this is not going. And that's a lane in itself. Yes. You may not be hearing Quincy, but he said that's a lane within itself.
It is.
Yeah.
It definitely is.
Look, Freddie is laughing because Quincy, first of all, this is intriguing because Quincy don't ever say anything. Yeah, this is good. But that's what it's all about. It's being relatable. I mean, that's how you become impactful. Seriously, so I'm excited. All right, Saints, we are on our way out. She has done a phenomenal job. I told you she was going to be great. So glad that we had her today. This is Pastor Lakisha Johnson, Macedonia Church. Listen, I want to see the church. She's saying that you will pass by the city if you're not careful. I have ridden up and down that highway on my motorcycle. I got to promise you, I've never, ever seen anything that talks about Hollywood, Mississippi. Now, I've heard of Hollywood, Mississippi. I have no idea where that is.
Yeah. So if you're going down 61,
and I've been on 61
before you get to that area, before you get to Tunica on the right hand side.
Before you get to
Tunica, if you make it to Tunica,
then that's it.
You made it too far.
So that's how I'm missing it, because usually the way I'm coming to Tunica is 269. So I'm already past where I need to turn off.
Well, do you take 269 to 69, or do you take 269 to Highway 61?
No, I take 269 into 61.
So if you keep 61 out, you're gonna pass Robinsonville, where are all the casinos. So,
yes.
Okay. So if you pass that, you're gonna pass like a Pecan Grove.
So I've got to go further south. Okay.
Farther down.
Then that's how I'm missing it then, because usually when I hit the Tunica, I'm going to the Blue and White Cafe. And then that's as far as I'm going.
Oh yeah, so you have to go down. You have to go down far.
But I passed the casinos to get to the Blue and White. I'm pretty sure.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah. So blue. So if you keep going down just a little farther, then you will see there's a turn off called Tate Road. You turn there. But it's like a whole like a little subdivision of Hollywood. There's a sign that it may be. Like I said, if you're going too fast,
I gotta pay attention to that next
time.
So
my uncle always says that you might visit Hollywood, California, you might visit Hollywood, Florida, but don't die until you get to Hollywood, Mississippi. That's what he said.
Is that not good?
Yeah,
Is
so don't
that
die
not good?
until you visit Hollywood,
Say you've been to
Mississippi.
Hollywood, California.
You've been to Hollywood, Florida.
My Lord,
But don't
God.
die until you get to Hollywood, Mississippi.
Boy, look here.
You know, and
It just take a Baptist preacher to say it. That's all it does.
And we're a small church, Bishop, but we got big faith. And we've seen God do some amazing things down in Macedonia. I mean, a lot of churches closed, didn't open back up after the pandemic, but we've seen our tithes increase.
Oh wow,
astronomical. And we a church. I mean, when I tell you they love their ministry staff. I mean, love days. They started giving me a love day, even though I told them they didn't have to.
That's cool.
But when I tell you that they take care of us, they gonna show up, they gonna support. We small, and I tell them all the time, we may be small in number, but we big on faith.
That's cool.
And our faith has kept us.
That is cool. I like that.
And so I'm just amazed at what God has done down there for me. Because He has increased me, to be able to serve especially the youth. I was doing Bible study with them where, we created prayer rooms. I took these little cardboard cardboards that I got from Dollar Tree, and they made their own prayer rooms to where they put their own scriptures and stuff on it, so where they can have their own prayer rooms. I did a Bible study where I had a puzzle made with the church logo, and there was one piece missing to signify to them that even though you're one person, that one piece is missing when you're missing out of the church. Just different little things like that, to get them, engaged in church in order for them to be able to know.
That's some good stuff.
So I love those people down there, and they love me.
That's some good stuff.
If not, they've been pretending all this time.
Folk ain't pretending like that.
But God is calling me out to plant a church.
Oh wow.
So that's what me and my husband is working on now.
Oh wow.
I was guilty about it at first. I was like, I don't want to leave, but I know God has been dealing with me for a few years now. So that's what we're working on now.
Well, we're gonna have to have that conversation so we can help you understand. Yeah, this is we know about that church planning stuff. Quincy and I, that was our whole life, 16, almost 17 years ago, and every step of planning. It's what I'm writing my dissertation on now. And what grows a church, a birthed church? What kind of preaching, what kind of leadership grows a planted church? And I hope that, because that's as close as I'm coming to a book, that it will help. I'm telling y'all that it will help some people, because I legitimately think there's a way you have to teach and preach and develop leadership. And I think if there's anything that has helped our church, it's been those three things: the teaching, the preaching, and the leadership development, especially in the early days, because we were intentional about everything. And it has brought us to a place where now we're living in the dividends of all of that stuff. So we'll get a chance to talk about that cool stuff. All right, Memphis, we love you. Those who are outside of Memphis, we so appreciate you being with us every week. I think this has been phenomenal. You'll get a chance to see it and hear it. Just keep praying for her. Keisha's going to do phenomenally well in whatever God allows her to do, because her heart is good. This is Bishop. You know my handle. I'm spiritual, not churchy. I am out of here. Take care.
Thanks for listening to Beyond the Pulpit with Bishop Kevin. If you enjoyed this conversation, please be sure to like and leave a review wherever you get your podcasts. To stay connected with Bishop and Beyond the Pulpit podcast, follow @Beyond the Pulpit the podcast on all social media platforms. See you next week.